It is with great pleasure that I introduce our next speaker. I'm always a little embarrassed that we drag him over here. He's got so much good information to impart on us, and we give him such little time to share it. So it's an encapsulated sort of synopsis of what is really going on in a very abbreviated form. And it's still great information. Hopefully you'll have an opportunity to answer a few questions as well. To speak to us about some things going on nationally, most specifically right-of-way legislation from the American Motorcyclist Association, Emery Zotter.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Try it again. Good afternoon. I'd like to thank Jay Jackson and the Board of Directors of ABATE of Indiana for the opportunity to come and talk. Jay said I started out by having 4 hours and I've whittled it down to a half hour, so I'll try to impart some information that Jay mentioned. Nationally, there's a lot of things going on. In particular, we'd like to just give you an update on where we are on some legislation that you may be hearing about in Indiana this coming session. It was something that was tried but did not make it in the last session. So with that, can I have the clicker as well? Sorry about that, Chief. Okay, as Jay said, my name is Emery Zotter. I'm with the Government Relations Department of the American Motorcyclist Association. Just by way of background, I've been on staff about 7 years. I'm a former MSF motorcycle safety instructor in the state of Ohio, taught the program for 10 years. Really enjoyed it, but time just became an issue. And with the travel schedule that we have, I had to give up teaching, which I truly miss. By background, I'm also an engineer by training. I really enjoy the technical things inside, and sometimes the legislation is a bit of a challenge. So the next 25 minutes, I hope to just give you an overview of what's going on with regard to the right-of-way violations issue, which is called the Justice for All campaign that we have at the AMA, and have been working with several states to try to get legislation enacted to address that issue. Also, there's a handout going around the room. That information is everything that's in the PowerPoint presentation. Obviously, for the sake of time, we're not going to have a chance to discuss all of it. The idea is to give you a takeaway that if something in there triggers a point of interest, you'll at least have a reference on what's going on in some of the other states. Questions at any time, I am limited to a half hour. Again, a very brief intro. Justice for All campaign. Distracted inattentive driving. I want to bring that in because there's a connection between the Justice for All campaign and the whole notion of inattentive or distracted driving. A very quick encapsulation of what's going on in the other states. And the reason for that is it's important to know what's going on around you because that issue may visit your state. 2 reasons. Something called unintended consequences. And this typically happens when a state proposes legislation. And let me give you an example. 3 years ago in the state of Minnesota, in order to increase the amount of ethanol used in the state of Minnesota, obviously a big agriculture state, they had proposed making a modification in Minnesota that would allow them to mix 20% ethanol in motor fuel. So it would be 20% ethanol, 80% gasoline, or something called E20. In the United States right now, there are only 2 motor fuels for gasoline-powered vehicles that are approved by the US EPA. E10, which is gasoline blended up to 10% ethanol, and E85, which is used in the flex vehicles, or flex fuel vehicles. In order for Minnesota to legally sell E20, they had to make application to the US EPA for a waiver. And what the waiver says is if granted by the US EPA, Minnesota could sell fuel blended up to 20% ethanol. But if it's granted at the federal level, other states would be able to do the same thing. So by Minnesota proposing to make application to US EPA for E20, E20 could become available in other states as well. What's the issue with E20? Read your owner's manual. Every one of you that's riding a motorcycle right now, the owner's manual says nothing greater than E10. And there's a reason for it. A lot of technical reasons. You don't want to put E20 in your motorcycle. The notion of unintended consequences, what happens in one state can have a national impact, is very clear with the fuels issue. The second thing is legislators talk to each other. They go to conferences, they go to events, they talk to each other. What works in one state You can plant the seed in another legislator's mind just by saying, hey, we looked at XYZ in our state, maybe that's something you ought to think about. And while not all of these issues are motorcycle related, a number of them can have a spillover effect. And that's the chilling thing, is that so much of this goes on behind closed doors that we don't know about. And it can certainly have an impact on what we do. By way of introduction, again, the American Motorcyclist Association was founded in 1924, about 300,000 members nationwide. We certainly don't have the presence in the state of Indiana like ABATE of Indiana does, and to your credit again with all the folks that have taken time away today to come for education and camaraderie, congratulations. You again are one of the premier states that all of the organizations look to for leadership and how you get things accomplished. So congratulations to you as a state and an organization. We have 3 offices, one in Pickerington, Ohio, where our museum is co-located. We have an office in Washington, D.C. that Jay mentioned earlier. We do have a federal presence. We have 2 full-time staff in D.C. that work primarily on the federal issues. But we also have an international presence in partnership with the Motorcycle Riders Foundation and FIM and FEMA in Europe. We deal a lot with the international issues at the United Nations levels. And you've heard earlier about standards for motorcycles, whether it's braking, emissions, whatever. A lot of that's coming to us through the international community, particularly from the European community. So we have to be very careful and very mindful of not only the federal level, but the international level as well.